the 6th of February 2023. Can't believe it's February already. Thank you for attending. Thank you to members of the public who are either here in person or watching via our web connection. The meeting today is open to the public. We haven't received any petitions, and we have actually got 2 questions from members of the public. Please can I request that mobile telephones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today, and if there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is Tudor Square. I'm now going to ask each member of the committee to introduce themselves, and I better start with myself. I'm Richard Williams, I'm a member for Stannington Ward, and I'm chair of this committee.
Yeah, Councillor Alan Hooper, Councillor for the West Ecclesfield Ward.
Councillor Sue Alston, Councillor for Fulwood.
Councillor Karen McGowan for Burley Ward.
Councillor Tony Downing, Mossborough Ward.
Councillor Marianne Elliott, Green Councillor for Gleadless Valley.
Thank you. I'll now ask the officers up here to introduce themselves. And when the officers speak, could you give your details, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Robert Parkin. I'm the legal advisor to the committee today.
Hi, I'm Lisa Firth. I'm the Director of Parks, Leisure and Libraries.
And I'm Dawn Shaw, I'm the Director of Communities.
Rachel Marshall, Principal Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we do. We have Councillor Paul Wood, who's given an apology. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of items for exclusion to the public and press, I can confirm there are no items today. Moving on to item 4, do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? No, thank you. Item 5 is the minutes of our last meeting. I'll read the page numbers, and if you wish to make a comment, please indicate. Page 11, page 12, and that's it. Could we have the work programme, please?
Thank you, Chair. If we can leave to the work programme, which starts on page 13 of the agenda. There are a set of recommendations at the top of page 14, which we'll be asking the committee to agree today. I would just like to draw the committee's attention, please, to Appendix 1 Work Programme, Part 1, which is outlined on page 16, which indicates new items and any removed items from the work programme moving forwards. And then from page 18 onwards, the forthcoming work programmes ahead in this year. So I will pass back to you, Chair, to take any questions from the committee and to get those recommendations agreed, if possible, please.
Councillor Alston.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question, if I may. There's quite a long list of items on here. Is it possible to indicate, sort of maybe in a separate column or something, which of those are for decision and which of those are just for information? I just think it's quite interesting, but it's also quite important information when it comes to prioritising.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Councillor Alston, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention a proposal for putting something onto the work plan, and I wondered, can I do that now? Is that appropriate?
Thank you. I think it's something to be discussed at the next pre-meeting. Just to let you be reassured that I'm very keen that that item should go on. and then we'll put it forward into the next meeting, and then we will have a discussion about it in the pre-agenda for the meeting. This is basically, it's an item on biodiversity and nature. That's the one you're talking about?
Yes, it is, thank you. I was thinking perhaps we could have a working group to discuss the work that the council are doing to improve biodiversity, because there is lots of work going on, and it would be good to pull all that together. So my intention was that I proposed we had a working group, a task and finish group, to do that work. So if that can go on the next agenda, that would be great, thank you.
Yes.
Just to add that after the suggestion at the last meeting, I've spoken with colleagues who are also going to pull together a working group of officers. I raised the point about a working group for members as well, and so that's going to be included in that work. So I can give you an update on that when I've got further information.
Brilliant, thank you, Lisa.
Peter?
Are we discussing part 2 as well, the potential items?
Which page you on, Peter?
Sorry? Page 17, on the list.
Yeah, you can.
It's just, I was going to raise the issue regarding the Buildings and Cremations revised cemetery policy. But have you any idea when that's liable to be? You're probably aware there's a lot of tension in Shire Green with a titular engraving in the Shire Green Centre. And I just wonder whether we're going to get some proper guidelines of what the new rules are going to be, or if we're going to change the rules.
I had discussions with Ellie Fraser, who's the head of service, and we know that now that we have to progress this sooner rather than later. There's also the lack of, not lack of, but we are going to run out of burial space in the forthcoming years. So we are going to prioritise this. The rules, as they are set at the moment, aren't adequate because, and what happens is when something like this happens, you look at the policy and the policy doesn't support us in any way. So we do know that has to change. So we're going to start undertaking that work. I haven't got a date, but sooner rather than later, we're going to get additional resources to help us to do that as well. And we'll do that in consultation with members.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Alston.
Yeah, thank you on that same item. I mean, one of the principal reasons that we lots of people wanted to move to a committee system was that we would have the opportunity to discuss things before they became a policy. In other words, for the committee to decide how they wanted to engage the public in that and to do some pre-decision scrutiny. And therefore, any new decisions, ideally, I would have thought, need to come earlier rather than later, rather than at the last minute. So if I can just raise that as how we should be moving forward. Thank you.
So just to reiterate, we will be consulting with members on this piece of work as soon as we start.
Is there any other queries on the work agenda? Okay, well, I've just been advised. Can we agree the recommendation, please? That looks unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, I just think I should actually jump back to the agenda and do the public questions. We've had two. Neither of the people putting the questions are here, but they will go into the minutes and they will, of course, get a formal written response. First question is from D. Arundel. How many known access controls are in place on the Sheffield Parks and Countryside service land of A or K-frame type, B, chicane type, C, other? I've been advised that at the moment, Parks and Countryside doesn't hold that information. However, they will add this point to our standard assessments in order that the information begins to be gathered and regularly reviewed as part of site reviews and projects. Question 2. In light of the Equalities Act, Section 20, and the Local Transport Note 1.20 guidance, what is the policy of this committee towards barrier replacement to meet statutory requirements? It should be noted as well as the aforementioned EA 2010 S20 EA 2010 Section 29 outlines that it is unlawful to discontinue or not provide a service or access to a service on the basis of a protected characteristic. A person making use of a mobility aid or invalid carriage falls under the purview of this definition. The answer is as follows. Where possible, our parks are open without entrance restrictions. There are a number of factors which makes this problematic on some sites, including sufficient antisocial behaviour issues, including but not limited to fly tipping and off-road vehicle damage. In some cases, K barriers have been necessary to improve safety on sites, and removing these might exacerbate issues of site making and they're less safe for all other users. We review access to sites and we always consider the most accessible option and replace barriers with a more accessible option if appropriate. Question 3. The Sheffield Parks and Countryside Service or the Council's capital investment teams have any planned replacements of barriers with bollards, excluding those underway on National Cycle Network 67-627. There is no ongoing or planned replacement programme. When renewals are required or other improvements are proposed in the vicinity of a barrier, bollards may be considered if appropriate. This decision will be taken on an on-site, site-by-site basis. And finally, in this section, will the committee be working with the new Active Travel Commissioner to make the parks accessible for everyone, regardless of physical ability? Yes, every effort is taken to improve all sites, and active travel is an important priority for this committee. We also had a late question, which I'm quite happy to take, from Stuart Wilson. What is the current position regarding the provision of indoor bowling facilities as part of the new development at Springs Leisure Centre, which was due to commence in 2023? We are currently reviewing the financial modelling for investment in our leisure facilities. As part of this, we are taking into account the impacts of increased inflation and energy pressures. Within the investment proposals, we are exploring the option for provision of an indoor bowling facility. The original planning was based on the potential to provide a facility at the Concord site when that is rebuilt. Following feedback from the indoor bowling community, we are now also exploring the possibility of an indoor bowling facility being provided at Springs. More detail will be available later in the year once the financial modelling and more detailed design work for the sites has concluded. Thank you.
Are we allowed to comment on one of the replies? It's just the one regarding the K-frames that are being debated about, because from the cyclist point of view, they're a nightmare. Even on the cycle routes, the transparent trail, you've got these really K-frames, and it doesn't seem to stop the motorbikes, which is the original intention. What it does, it stops people pushing prams through, and it seems restricting normal access rather than stopping the actions that go off with these bikes. They shouldn't have gone. But I know a lot of the cyclists keep coming to the cycle forum complaining about, and we do need to review the policy in this area. So we do have a look at it, Chair.
Yeah, we'll note that for the minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, similar to what Peter just mentioned. I mean, in the area where I represent, we have the same issue, but at one point they put a kissing gate there, which will allow access to push chairs and wheelchairs, but not motorcycles. So I wonder if that's an option that can be looked at, because as you say, you don't really want to be restricting people with wheelchairs getting through, and the damage that's caused by off-road bikes and cars is untrue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That'll be noted. Any other? Marianne.
Sorry, can I just add to that? And basically, just to say further, you said that there is no programme of replacement or removal intended, and they'll be assessed on a site-by-site basis. But I mean, I believe that other councils have actually taken it upon themselves to do that work, to replace and remove barriers which are unnecessarily restrictive. So if it could be looked at, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's been noted by the officers. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the updates and briefings. We have 3 this afternoon. 2 are verbal and 1 is in the papers. There are 3 presentations, and I'll ask for the first one, which is community safety briefing on always an alternative.
Afternoon, everybody. Sorting out the administration, but we'll do introductions anyway. So I'll start with myself and then I'll explain what we're here for, and I'll go around. So my name's Jason Siddall. I'm the head of communities. I've got responsibility for safer neighbourhoods, most of the functions in the council. Angela?
Hi, I'm Angela Greenwood. I am here from South Yorkshire Violence Reduction Unit.
I'm Anthony Alcindor, and I'm the CEO of Always an Alternative.
Thanks, Anthony.
Could we just wait a second, please, Jason? Well, for the benefit of people who may be watching this on the webcam, without the mics, people can't hear.
We'll do that again.
Could you do that again, please?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Angela Greenwood. I'm from the South Yorkshire Violence Reduction Unit.
I'm Anthony, the CEO of Always an Alternative.
Okay, we're getting used to the technology now, but all right. Thank you, everybody. I've got the first slide, so if we can move on. You can see from the first slide there, this is about knife crime awareness, or the presentation is today. But actually, we want to focus on some really good work that Anthony and Angela have been doing in partnership. So I'm just going to do the first slide, but then I'll hand over to the two of them to continue with the rest of it. Really, the first slide is just about local context. So what is this all about? And we thought we'd just list a number of the either statutory duties or teams or projects that are ongoing at the moment in this space. And this is particularly around serious violence and tackling serious violence and crime in the city. So you can see there that there's a number of them, and going from the top. I put the serious violence duty at the top. Not a lot of people are aware of this at the moment. I'm not sure whether all of the committee are aware. But on the 31st of January, the serious violence statutory duty came into force. And this is a duty that all local authorities, as well as partners, have got an obligation to be part of. And I'm not going to go into all of the detail about that today, because actually we could do this as a separate topic, what the serious violence duty is. But I guess it doesn't take much working out, but it's around tackling serious violence and crime in the city. It's very new. We've only just recently had all of the guidance around it. There is some funding that comes with the serious violence duty as well. But again, I've not come to talk about that in particular today, although I could come back to the committee at another point and we could do that in more detail. Second on that slide is Safer Sheffield strategy. We've got a Safer Sheffield strategy that's a joint strategy with South Yorkshire Police and our partners. And again, that's around priorities in the city for tackling antisocial behaviour and crime, serious violence. There's a number of theme groups that sit around that. I'm not going to go into all of the detail there as well, because again, I could probably do another 15 minutes just on that particular subject. But more than happy to come back and talk about a lot of this in detail, as I said. We've got the Violence Reduction Unit strategy. Angela's from the Violence Reduction Unit, and she's got a slide on that, so I'll not spoil Angela's thunder. We've got Police and Crime Plan priorities. They're published. If you go on the internet and type in Police and Crime Plan, you will be able to see South Yorkshire Police and Crime Plan, and in there there's a number of priorities. One of those is tackling serious crime. We've got South Yorkshire Knife Crime Strategy. That expired in 2021. It's due for a refresh, so this is quite pertinent in terms of the subject matter today. And then we've got other groups that sit around this in terms of the partnership work that we do with South Yorkshire Police and others. So Fortify and the South Yorkshire Police GRIP team are two areas of partnership working, if you like. There's a lot of activity that goes on in the city around disrupting organised crime and tackling serious violence. And then we've got what a lot of councillors will be familiar with, I'm sure, is the neighbourhood policing and the partnership work that goes off between the police and other partners in this space and Sheffield City Council in terms of that really localised neighbourhood partnership working. So I thought really the first slide is just about setting that context. There's a lot of work that goes on in the city around tackling antisocial behaviour, crime, knife crime and serious crime. So just thought to set the scene with that slide. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Angela and Anthony. I'll tell you a little bit about a project that we've been working on recently, which I'll not steal their thunder, but I'm hoping that it's a positive step forward in terms of some really important messages. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Jason. Like I said, I'm Angela from the Violence Reduction Unit. When I started working with Anthony and Jason and all his team, one of the first things that we kept getting asked is, how bad is knife crime in Sheffield? How bad actually is it? So when I've been working with Anthony, we actually found those figures out, and we just want to present those to you today with a bit of context behind this, because it's important for the project that we're doing. So over the last 10 years, this graph shows it. In Sheffield alone, there's been 37 homicides. And what a homicide means, if you didn't know, it's either murder or manslaughter. If we go on to the next slide, please, this gives you the context. So that graph shows you the actual numbers of recorded homicides in Sheffield by a knife in Sheffield over the last 10 years. And that's 37 in a population of 556,500. And this is even more specific because it's actually a knife where we can have that recorded as a knife. So it can be combat, Rambo knife, military knife, kitchen knife, or knife. So anybody, this is excluding anything about any other sharp instruments. So for the first time ever, we're actually able to share that data with you to give the context. What we're not going to do today, but it's again for further discussions as we look at the renewing the knife crime strategy, is we can't compare Sheffield. Because the first question is, well, how does that compare to everywhere else? We can't compare Sheffield at the moment because other police authorities have different systems, they have different ways of recording. And when you even look at most similar group, which the police do, that's at county level, it's not at city level. And again, when I say 37, that's a volume and it's not a rate. And a lot of people do their crime recording by rate. And I'm not saying that the police will never do that. I've talked to Superintendent Dave Cowley and he's assured me that they're looking at this all the time. There's a national homicide prevention strategy where one of the key things in that is getting better data, better quality data, so we can work better together on knowing exactly how bad the problem is in Sheffield. But I just wanted to table that because no one's ever done that before and actually showed the actual figures for Sheffield. And I hope there's some reassurance in that. I'm not going to comment personally on if that's high or low, but I want you to show that there is 37 that have happened in the last 10 years. So next slide, please. So again, I'm from the Violence Reduction Unit, and you're probably wanting to know what that means. I've brought some leaflets, so I will ask those to be passed around. But while they're going round, this is a different unit. This is Home Office funded, and it's South Yorkshire wide, and it's looking at the causes of violence. And so we're actually looking at what those social issues are in society that are causing violence to happen in our communities. And it's a way of looking at national policy, bringing it down to a regional level, South Yorkshire level, then bringing it down to Sheffield level, and then having a look at communities and how we can actually change things in our local communities. And it uses evidence-based as well. So in terms of we have lots of data that we use, but we also interview local youth groups and ask them how it feels in their community, and we do that every year. We talk to our local community groups all the time, and that's how we get these projects developing. Again, gives you that context where these projects come from. So those together, when you're looking at data, evidence, community and causes, is called a public health approach. And some people might have heard of that, a public health approach to tackling violence. So if you look at the Sheffield level, we've got this action plan. We've thought of 17 different priorities that we could look at to tackle, reduce and prevent violence happening in our society, in our city for the next few years, long term. Two of those are very relevant to this project that Anthony's got. So one of them is a reducing access to lethal means. We're working together, we've put some knife bins in, Anthony's got his own knife bins, and that's a way of disposing of a knife as safely as you can, and you put it away in an anonymous knife bin and it's disposed of. And then, well, I won't spoil the surprise, but there's a reason why that's relevant to today's discussion. And then we're looking at working to change the cultural and social attitudes that contribute to violence. This is a huge thing, and we work with a number of projects in schools who deliver some absolutely excellent work to school children around trying to change the attitudes, around carrying knives, the danger of knives, and that whole thing around joining gangs and having more positive role models. And we work with United and Wednesday, Mums United, Amber Service, Youth Services. And then we come to the project which Anthony's now going to talk about, which is happening very soon, which just takes this one further to have that discussion. And I'll leave you now for Anthony to talk about his project.
Thank you. Next slide, please. I'm going to stand up, otherwise I'll keep jumping my legs around. So, right. I started off 5 years ago. After I changed my life around myself, I got involved in a lot of things which I shouldn't have. Why? Because I didn't have a role model to look at. And the people in the areas where I grew up was all up to, we'll call it badness. I decided that I didn't want to do that, even though I was made to feel that was my only option. And this is where Always an Alternative, the name came from, but it didn't start as Always an Alternative. I took myself out of where I was. I went to university, got a degree, got a master's in IT, even though I don't do nothing to do with IT now. I created businesses, a security company. I also co-own a children's home in Rotherham with Joe. And I wanted to give back. I honestly felt that I knew the reason why these young people were getting involved in knife crime and joining gangs and making essentially what was the wrong decision. So it started 5 years ago, as I've said, as Keep Sheffield Stainless. This was an anti-knife crime campaign where I attempted to go into schools and deliver education on knife crime. This was the stats, this was the murders, this was the wrong direction totally. Anyway, I wasn't successful with the education side, but I was able to get the first portable weapon amnesty bin designed and put in Sheffield. After that, it was the first because it had wheels and I could move it around. Why would you make it portable? Because I wasn't sure that placing a bin somewhere strategy like stuck was the way forward. I wanted to be able to move with the fashion. I wanted to be able to move with the young people, so that's why I did it. After some time of working with young people, I decided, you know what, it's not actually the weapon that's the issue here, because I could put a gun in that young person's hand, I could put a glass bottle, they could use their own fist. That was the issue. Then it dropped. It's the mindset and how they're thinking and how they're brought up and what they're led to believe, what the issue is. So I changed it all around. I changed it to Always an Alternative because I myself got secondary trauma from talking to all these people. I was the first person that would get a video of somebody getting murdered. Now, I was 16 when I first ever saw my murder myself, but as I've grown up and I've got responsibilities and I've got children, for some reason, it impacted me a lot harder. So Always an Alternative was born with the plan of looking at the mindset of the young people. So rather than talking about the weapon, we talk about their behaviours, we talk about other people's behaviours, we talk about conflict management, we talk about confidence, we talk about futures. And with that, I managed to I think I've visited more schools in Sheffield, a few in South Yorkshire. I've been to multiple prisons, I've been to youth clubs, I've been everywhere trying to educate young people around the dangers of making a silly mistake. Also, we've been able to put 8 more weapon amnesty bins around Sheffield, and I'm sure that we had an input in the violence reduction deciding to get the same ones. Now, these weapons bins are quite vital because they're giving people a safe option to get rid of their weapons. Now, I don't know about the weapons bins that Andrew's had, but my weapons bins have collected over 500 weapons, including little flick knives to knives that couldn't even fit into the bin, 2 firearms and live shells. So they are very, very useful. And I myself go to young people and to people's houses to collect the weapons myself. I do this with a stab-proof vest and with gloves. And people often ask me, why do I risk it all? And for me, it's one person will make one mistake and it will have a massive effect on a whole lot of people. And that is one of the reasons why I approached Ange, and Ange was, thankfully, was okay in allowing me to do the next project, which is the Victims' Voices. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, here's some more work. Sorry, I jumped the gun there. So we've also got 20 bleed control kits across South Yorkshire. There's a picture of the weapons bin. We've got 8 of those. I wrote a book called One Knife, Many Lives. In the middle is a tree created of 300 of the weapons and a few more pictures of the things that I get up to in my spare time. Next slide, please. This is the tree of opportunity. This is made by 300 weapons. So, the Victim Voices project is solely to show knife crime from the victim's point of view. Now, this wasn't my original slide. My original slide was images of the people that have been murdered through knife crime. But for some reason, it wasn't allowed to be shown today. And my question is that because it's wrong, or is that because us as communities cannot stare the people in the face who are no longer here because of knife crime? The exhibition of the Victim Voices will have a documentary where I talk to only three of the 37 people killed by knife crime about their journey. And I did it in 2 days, and it was exhausting. The amount of tears that dropped that day, the amount of worry, the amount of unanswered questions is a real concern for me, and I hope when you guys watch this documentary, you'll see it as well. As well as the documentary, we've got the Tree of Opportunity, which has been extended an extra 2 foot with another 200 weapons that I've collected from the streets of South Yorkshire. But we're putting memorial plaques of all the people that have passed away due to knife crime. We've got 16 pieces of artwork from secondary schools that wanted to spread awareness of knife crime, and we've got some more artwork from different artists that are trying to show their feelings around knife crime. And yeah, that is Victims' Voices. And one thing that I'd like you to do, if you're on your phone or your laptop, is just give me 1 second. I'm a very big guy. I can look after myself. I have a child who lived a very, very different lifestyle to me. You know, he doesn't see domestic violence, he doesn't see drugs, he doesn't see none of that. Quite soft. I'm quite jealous, actually. The other day, despite the work that I do going to schools, talking to young people and warning them about knife crime, my son saw his first and his last stabbing. Well, I bet you're thinking, well, that's normal amongst young people. Maybe so, maybe not. I don't know. And to be fair, I'm not bothered. The issue, what I've got now is, I do anything to protect my son, my children. Thinking about it, I do anything to protect each and every young person that I deliver my workshops to in school. Now, seeing the crime is a little thing because it's done. But the effect that has had on my child is serious. He was unable to go to school by himself. He's unable to go out with his friends by himself. And have you all got children? I'm guessing you've got somebody that you love. Yeah, I'm guessing so. It's a terrible thing to go through. And the question that he asked that stuck out the most was, Dad, everything was normal until it happened. He said, I didn't see a knife, but I saw the person walking. He said it was all good, and then he dropped on the floor, and as he looked at the person on the floor, he looked to his face, to which his eye was poking out because the blade must have gone up through his face right there. Now, knife crime has become a normal way of solving violence amongst young people in general. Not just ones that look like me, ones that, little version of all of us in this room. And I think we've got a huge opportunity to stop this wave. But I need support. I've done this on my own for a long time. It's only this project and the project before I've asked for funding. Up until that, all the weapons bins, they were all out of my own money. I still go to schools and do talks, and I don't take one bit of money. All I ask from people is you do a favour for me, for somebody else, for free. That's all I ever ask. Because I think if one person helps another person that needs it, the world will be a better place. So yeah, thank you all, and any questions? No? Thank you.
Are there no questions? Karen?
Yeah, wow, I think you stunned us all into silence then. Well done in turning your life around. Well done in everything you've done and you're achieving. I don't know about the funding side. I don't know if that's something that we've got control over, or where the funding, how much you're asking for, or anything around that. So I don't know if that's something that we need to look at outside of this. My question's that we've got a knife bin in our ward. I'm in Burley.
And I was shocked because I didn't think you'd get that many in, to be honest. And I think in a really short space of time, the first time they emptied it, there was 40 knives in it. And I was absolutely wow, you know, that. And so I wanted to know is, do you think they're working, is my first question. Do you think a lot more bins will help? You know, that, I just want to know, do you think we should have more? Like we've got lots of litter bins. I'm not saying we have them on every street corner, but do you think they help?
I 100% think that they help. Like I said, they've enabled me to collect over 500. I think what we must understand is we don't just go to a community and plonk it there and expect for it to be used. What we do is we work with people within that community and make it part of the community and welcome people to use it.
Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and Chair, and thank you, Anthony. I first met you when I was Lord Mayor of Sheffield, just after you'd started up, I think it was, and I came down to your little shop down at the bottom of the moor there, and I came down there to see you. As has already been said, these knife bins, I certainly would, as a councillor, would like to see more of these. We do get a bit of pushback in some of the areas. I mean, I represent an area in Mossborough, Westfield area. You've probably heard of it. And there was some pushback there saying, oh, we don't want that, you know. But I think that if we could get one in each community, I think that would be the way forward. Listening to what you've just said, you think it's a good idea. You think it's working. You know this better than some of us here. So thank you for your presentation. It's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are you able to elaborate a little bit more on the event that's coming up?
Yeah, we've got, well, so Victims' Voices, that's basically the point of view from the victims. And why did I do that? Because I don't do things one-dimensional. I don't think you understand something one-dimensional. So you looking at the paper day after day after day about a stabbing, after the first couple of times, it's just another stabbing. However, you don't really get to understand the pain that this causes the victims. And it is upsetting. It was so upsetting, like, and I must thank those that took part in the documentary because it must have been terrible for them. And there's so many unanswered questions and so many questions that I came across that had me thinking, and one that stuck out was how we support those that have lost a loved one because of knife crime, because of the way that their relative passed away. Their own friends are unable to approach them in a way because they don't want to upset them. So they end up totally isolated, grieving by themselves. And I just felt sorry for them because on one hand, I can understand why they were so sad and upset because they felt isolated. But on the other side, I felt for their friends and stuff because it is really, really a delicate subject and you don't want to cause people upset. So, yeah, that's the Victims' Voices. And we've got another one. With the Tree of Opportunity, I visited 16 schools in total. With that, I put up an art display around knife crime, notes and quotes from people that have lost loved ones to knife crime, and I give a workshop, a talk around knife crime and the artwork and what inspired it, and basically on decisions. We became a charity in 2000, in December we became a charity, so we're just looking at accessing more funding, but project-wise, that's the only two we've got lined up. We are focused on getting a mobile youth club. This is to allow us to become the experts in detached youth work. So we will be going into communities where there might be violence or they might have an issue, this is knife crime, but I'd like for people to understand that we just don't do knife crime. We do helping young people for whatever reason. So that's what the Mobile Youth Club is about, and we've managed to raise £25,000 ourselves with no funding to get that. So we're just looking for a minibus at the minute. So if you've got a cheap one knocking about, Yeah, I won't mind having it. But yeah, that's it for the projects. We're always up for working with people. We're always up for engaging with young people in alternative ways. And yeah, I'm sure in a couple of months I'll have a few more projects to invite you all to.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Anthony. I don't know if there's any further questions, but just to confirm. Okay.
Just a quick, what would you say to a parent if they came to say, shall I buy my son a stab vest?
I would answer, you should use that money to maybe move house. No, really. What would I do? Honestly, I don't know. It seems like a good deal. No, I'd advise against it. What I would do is I would talk to my child and I'd teach them around seeing conflict and seeing, fights that might break out into violence. Because then what happens with a stab-proof vest is, if somebody wants to attack that said child, they'll just stab them in the leg or the arm. So if somebody is going to stab you, a stab-proof vest will not stop that from happening.
Thank you. Bernard, you indicated to speak.
I'm just looking at what frame of mind is it that gets people to the point where they are prepared to use a knife, and what what role does peer group pressure have on making them do that, and is there anything we can do about it? In your experience?
Thank you. What will drive somebody to pick up a knife? Protection. The brain's a very, very strange thing, you know. We all know about fight, flight or freeze. We all know about social media, the impact that's having. We all know about desensitization. The more you see something, the less it affects you. So we've got a whole host of problems that young people are facing. The only one thing that they don't have currently is much support around it. So if you was in fear of your life, you might protect yourself, such as if somebody burgled your house, I suspect you'd grab the nearest heavy thing just in case they got you. Now, this is the issue that young people have got when they go out. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of law, the second most important thing for people is to feel safe. Now, when young people are out on the roads, on the plane, whatever, they're feeling unsafe. And rightly so, they just want to feel safe. So they're doing what they think is right. It's just that they've not got the education and they're not being made aware of the consequences of doing so. So we need to work with young people and truly allow them to understand that, look, carrying a knife might seem like a good idea for protection, but it can change a lot of lives, including yours, your families, and the other person on the receiving end. And I'm all for education and allowing young people to understand that it's not just a knife and you're not just protecting yourself. And it's a very, very dangerous thing to do.
Thank you. I'll take your question, Karen, then I'll come back to Jason.
Yes, just very, very quickly. Just to say, you've just mentioned about the youth club, and I just wondered if there's any joint up work you can do with our youth service and team there. And then secondly, we've just been doing work plan, and with Jason saying that this was new legislation or whatever, it was out on 31st of this month. I just wonder if it's something that we ought to put on the work plan so that we're updated, please.
Yeah, totally agree, and that offers that. We can come back and talk about serious violence duty and do a more informed presentation about it. It's relatively new for us as well. It came in on the 31st of January, so that's how new it is. So it's developing at the moment, and we're talking to other colleagues in South Yorkshire, other South Yorkshire local authorities about the funding and how we might best use the funding that's available, etc. So it's a developing picture, but absolutely we can come back and talk about that. In terms of youth services involvement, that was something that I was going to come on to just before the questions finished. So just to confirm, the actual Victims' Voices premiere or the launch of Victims' Voices is at the Town Hall. On the 20th of March, it's 2 while 4 in the afternoon. And I know that all of the committee have had invites. If you've not seen that in your inbox, I've been told that the committee have been invited, so hopefully you have. So it'd be nice to see all of the committee at the actual premiere if you can make it. And I guess really, you know, Anthony's just given us some really powerful information there, but I think, you know, seeing the documentary, etc., on the 20th, it will get that message across, and so that's what we've been building up to, and it's part of our work, if you like, as a council, working with our partners in the city who are experts in this area to try to raise awareness, and it's part of our strategy in terms of reducing serious violence in the city, and all of the strategies that I talked about earlier all circle all of that, you know, that's the aim. In terms of youth services, the answer to that is yes, we've been, youth services have been involved with this. Unfortunately, Chelsea Renahan, who's the head of youth, can't be here today, but Chelsea's been working with us on this. And we will be bringing, or Chelsea's team will be bringing, buses, or bus loads, coach loads, whatever, of youths into the actual Victims' Voices exhibition, which will run for a couple of weeks. So it's not just on between 2 and 4 on that day, so it will be there for a couple of weeks. And over those 2 weeks, we're going to be bringing youths into the town hall. Part of that will be there'll be some discussions beforehand about the impacts, etc. Come in, see the documentary, see the presentations, and then go away and reflect on that afterwards in terms of what people have felt about that and what they've learned, etc. So we're very much working with our youth services on this as a project as well, which I guess actually I ought to have brought out in the earlier slide, so apologies for that, but you're quite right to ask it, yeah. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming in today. Very powerful words. I wish you good luck going forward. Thank you once again. Okay, item 9 on the agenda is another community safety matter. This is a briefing on the violence against women and girls, VAWG, I believe that's what it stands for, and I understand that you're going to be presenting it. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, it's Alison Higgins. I'm the Domestic and Sexual Abuse Commissioning Manager, as it says over there. Thank you very much for having me. So next slide, please, Rachel. So violence against women and girls. So I pulled out, I just did a quick Google when I did this presentation. And you'll see there that this is recent incidents in Sheffield that have been in the Star or on the BBC. And 2 of them are knife crime, actually, coincidentally. I didn't realise that the knife crime presentation was going to be before me. So domestic homicides in Sheffield quite often involve knife crime. So I'd be interested to know if that figure includes those or not. Yeah. So, but obviously violence against women and girls is bigger than knife crime, it's bigger than domestic homicide, it's all types of domestic abuse, it's rape and sexual assault, it's harassment, it's honour-based abuse, it's all of that kind of stuff. And the government's violence against women and girls strategy actually includes violence to males in those kind of intimate partner kind of and family situations as well. Next slide, please. So I've just put some, you can read that, just put some Sheffield headlines up. So in our commission services, we have about 6,000 people a year that come forward for domestic abuse services. Every month there's about 900 incidents reported to the police. 90% of those users of those services are women. 87% of the clients of Sheffield Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre are women. They have around 600 clients a year for their Independent Sexual Violence Advisor Service, which is the service that helps people through the courts. Talking back about domestic homicide reviews, we've had 18 deaths in the city since the legislation came in 2011 that have met the criteria for domestic homicides. Quite a lot of those are suicides, actually, these days, but 14 of them were women, and 15 of those deaths, the abuser was a man. Much violence against women and girls, though, isn't reported or disclosed. It's just what happens in everyday life. All the women in this room will know about harassment or sexism or so when we're talking violence, it can mean microaggressions, it can mean something serious like an assault. So it ranges across everyday life, and I think the root of it all, it comes down to sexist attitudes about what women's roles are in the home, as girls growing up, in the family, etc. So that's why it disproportionately affects women and girls. Next slide, please. So we've been lucky that we've had, thanks to Home Office funding, an organisation called Safe Lives have done a public health systems review of Sheffield's domestic abuse services. And so they've come up with some high-level stats that actually fit with the high-level stats that we have got in our team. But the one that I think stands out for me is that 86,000 people in Sheffield will have experienced domestic abuse at some point in their lives. So that's quite a big old chunk of the population, isn't it? And then in the past year, we're thinking it's about 23,000 people a year. And 13,000 children living in households where that abuse is going on. Next slide, please. So yeah, some of the responses to violence against women and girls over the last couple of years. So obviously, violence against women and girls has been going on, since time immemorial. But when Sarah Everard died in 2021 at the hands of the Mark Cousins, the police officer, obviously that brought it to the fore quite a lot more, and there's been quite a lot of responses in Sheffield. So we've got a Violence Against Women and Girls Forum that started in February 22, and we've got a mailing list of 70 women on that. It kind of acts as a consultation group around issues that are going on in the city around violence against women and girls. There's an involvement group that the police are running, and they've been consulting women about campaigns like the image at the top, the No More Stand With Us campaign. The Violence Reduction Unit that Angela works for has been conducting listening events, has brought out a statement that the council signed up to, and has most recently done mapping around what the responses are across the county. And there are monthly vigils on Devonshire Green on the first Sunday of every month. So yesterday was the last one at 6 o'clock. And the Women's Equality Party sort of organises that, but it's much broader than the Women's Equality Party. Anyone can go along and just sort of bear witness, I suppose, to the women and girls who've lost their lives in this country each month. So. Next slide, please. So in Sheffield, that gave us the new impetus, really, to look at whether we could join up to the White Ribbon campaign. So that's a leading charity engaging with men and boys to end violence against women and girls. And White Ribbon Day is the 25th of November. Hopefully you've all seen the banner on the front of the town hall. And the key thing is that is for men to stand up and promise to never commit, excuse or remain silent about violence against women and girls. And we got accreditation in time for 25th of November last year. Next slide, please. I think pretty much says the same thing, but it also points out that men can sign up to be ambassadors and women can sign up to be champions. So next one. And then this is what the White Ribbon campaign pull out. This is their sort of overarching stats that they share, which basically says that, 1 in 3 women will experience domestic abuse, 1 in 2 women will experience harassment in the workplace, etc., etc. We know that there's, we've been reaching out to girls in schools, particularly in the Darnall area, actually, who are saying to us they get on buses and they get harassed every day. Every single day they get sexist harassment. So next slide, please. So we were really pleased to sign up to White Ribbon, and the grey box just tells us of the officers that have put themselves forward, including Dawn, to lead up the campaign, because they very much want the White Ribbon campaign. The reason we've got the accreditation is because we got senior leaders to say, yes, I will sign up to be an ambassador, I will sign up to be a champion, in order to front the campaign, because it's got to have strategic buy-in. So next one, please. So yeah, we got ribbons, we got the banner, we got lots of people took ribbons in November. But what I'd say, I suppose, is it was internally focused really for this one just gone. But what we need to do now over this next year, I think, is start pushing it outwards and really shouting about it to the city. So next slide, please. So what we've got to do before May is come up with an action plan, and it covers some key areas. So strategic leadership. So the strategic leadership, we're actually kind of quite a long way in terms of achieving what we need to do and for our plan, because we've got that strategic buy-in to begin with. But there's things that we do need to think about in terms of how we monitor and evaluate within the council, you know, our response to violence against women and girls. But another key bit is engaging men and boys, and given that this is the Communities Committee, this is the perfect place really to bring that issue. So obviously next year we can promote making the promise and wearing white ribbons, but in between now and then we want to really skill people up so that they're able to have the conversations, so that when you're going out to, I mean, a lot of you will be able to have those conversations already, I'm sure, but when you're going out to your communities and making links with community groups, employers, etc., do you feel confident to have those conversations about how is sexism and sexual harassment, you know, confronted in that organisation? And also, obviously, there's the LACs and the fact that the LACs have an outward-facing remit. Next one. Changing culture is another key bit of the action plan. So this is where we've started to do some work with HR. So thinking about how do we make sure that in Sheffield City Council, if you work in Sheffield City Council, or if you're a member or anybody that comes in touch with Sheffield City Council, that you know that sexual harassment isn't acceptable, and you know what's going to happen if you decide to report that, and that people know that they shouldn't be doing it either. So have we got the right reporting mechanisms? Do they work properly? Are they sensitive? And what do we do about disciplinary processes? Obviously, we want to encourage people without having to go to disciplinaries to be sensitive and to not be sexist, but there will be some occasions when disciplinary processes will be needed. There's a Safety of Women at Night Charter that got launched the end of last year. So we're doing some work already in this area that is going in the right direction. And also we have got services for perpetrators of domestic abuse in the city. And we work closely with the police on this. And there's going to be a new programme for people who are perpetrators of stalking, for example, coming out soon. Next one, please. So raising awareness is the next sort of strand. Obviously, we need to do some comms around this. We need to make sure that people start putting on their email addresses that they support White Ribbon, and also reaching out to community events and entertainment venues, and encouraging partners to seek accreditation. And so colleagues in the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner are starting to look at whether they want to get White Ribbon accredited. It'd be great if South Yorkshire Police did. You know, obviously with everything that's going on around policing at the moment, it'd be something that they could do and join in with. Next one. So, and there's just examples of a couple of initiatives we've been doing in the last few years. So Ask for Angela, people probably know what that is. It's where you can go to the bar and ask for Angela if you're feeling that there's a dodgy situation going on when you're out on a night out. We've rebranded that. And there's a training session going on this month. I think we've got about 55 venues coming to, so that's really positive. And we've got the SASH, Sheffield Against Sexual Harassment poster on the left, which we've produced, and it's got all the it's got the university logos on it, so it's a sort of multi-agency initiative. And there's a QR code so that if you're out and about, you can link up to all the different support services. Next slide, please. And so I've just done here, I've just gone through the different services we've got in Sheffield. So we don't commission Hackenthorpe Lodge, but the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner do, and that's the Sexual Assault Referral Centre. But we work in partnership and were involved in the last tender process. So that's where people go to, if they need forensic examination, initial support after sexual assault. Next one, please. This is Sheffield Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre. They are our counselling provider for rape and sexual abuse, but they also provide the Independent Sexual Violence Advisor Service. And next one. IDAS are our community-based domestic abuse support service. So one-to-one support, structured and group support, safe zones, which is dispersed safe accommodation, and the sanctuary scheme, which is where you can get target hardening type equipment to make it more difficult for an ex-partner or somebody who's harassing you to get into your home. We commission them. Next slide, please. The refugees, we've got Young Women's Housing Project and Sheffield Women's Aid, both commissioned by the council. So Young Women's Housing Project is quite unusual, so it's a really positive project for girls and young women who've experienced sexual abuse to get really intensive support and get back to recovery. Next slide, please. Haven is our children's provider. They provide support for children and young people affected by domestic abuse, but we've also got a team in the council in children's services called the Strengthening Families team, and they provide training for social workers. There's a programme called Safe and Together, which is all about moving away from the old-fashioned ways that we used to do things, which were a bit victim-blamey, you know, telling mums that they were failing to protect their children when actually they were living in a situation of domestic abuse. Next slide, please. And we've got perpetrator programmes, we've got the Inspire to Change programme, and we've got the Caring Dads programme, both of which are really embedded now and are starting to hopefully change attitudes and give an opportunity for people to change their behaviour. Next slide, please. And then we've got various other providers in the city. So these aren't commissioned by us, but they work in partnership with us and work in partnership with the other agencies. And last slide. And then this is the summary that Safe Lives, who did the review recently of our domestic abuse services, gave us. And they said that Sheffield's got some real strengths in the area of responding to domestic abuse. Culture within services is positive, multi-agency work is effective. And then at the bottom, overall Sheffield should be proud of how it responds to domestic abuse. Strategic leaders give great insight and work with operational leads, and this filters into a culture of support and challenge within local services. So I thought it was important for you to know that we've actually got some good press. So, any questions?
Karen.
It's funny, I think with social media and everything today, what worries me is the self-esteem of our young women, and that's why they end up in some relationships because they're grateful for a bit of attention or whatever. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm just saying it just worries me that, you know, they're up against it with social media and everything else about what they should look like and that. So just from that point of view. But I was just thinking about the student, we've got a lot of students in this city, and I know you mentioned the logo of the universities, but is it worth working with the students' unions in both of those and seeing if there's anything we can get through there? I work at the university, so that's why I was thinking about it, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there's been quite a lot of work on spiking. There was a spiking working group, so drink spiking, when that was a big issue year before last. And yes, they are invited to our Violence Against Women and Girls Forum, so we've got those links now. So actually, I'd say the links were better now than they ever have been, to be honest. And yeah, and I think that they are good places for having those discussions, really, with young women as they come through. I think you're completely right about social media, and I think it is that, you know, it's really hard to combat that, isn't it? But we are commissioning things like training for trainers on healthy relationships education, and so we've just literally commissioned a bit of that very, very recently, and so that's going to be provided to youth services, to the Amber service, to some of the voluntary sector services, so that they've got more, you know, more skills to intervene with young people around those areas. There was something else I was going to say and it's gone out of my head.
It's gone out of my head, sorry, but there's another piece of work which I can't remember now. Sorry about that. I'll remember it in 2 minutes, I'm sure.
Okay. Bernard.
Yes, thank you very much for coming along. I'm the chair of the Central LAC, and I am an ambassador with the white ribbon. I think as a councillor, I get most frustrated with my inability to make sure that people feel safe in their own homes and in their community. I'm just wondering what support is there for older women, for example. I've got several examples of persistent antisocial behaviour inside council homes that goes on for years and years and years, and it makes me feel almost like powerless to be able to support them, other than to talk to them on the phone. But obviously we as a council can't be providing that level of service to everyone in our community. So what would you advise for older women? I understand exactly what you're talking about with younger women, yes, but for older women who often feel just as vulnerable. Thank you.
Well, domestic and sexual abuse services wouldn't deal with ASB as such unless it was ASB from an ex-partner or a family member. So it'd fit under housing, kind of ASB type stuff, and it depends who the perpetrator is. If the perpetrator is a neighbour, then it wouldn't count under violence against women and girls under this particular definition that the government use. However, there is increasingly better understanding about how domestic abuse impacts older people, and quite often, it's an issue when one partner gets dementia, for example. That can be a trigger where people have maybe had some element of domestic abuse in their relationship for a long time, but then it gets worse because of something like dementia in one of the partners. And so we've seen quite a lot of cases like that recently that the services I work with are working with social care on. So they might not necessarily be working directly with that person, but they'll be helping the social worker who is working with that person, if you see what I mean. But we have actually, through the MOJ, Ministry of Justice, got some funding recently for an older person's domestic abuse worker. So there is a kind of increasing recognition that older people, are experiencing these issues and do need support. And I think, over the years, there's been a bit of a kind of feeling that it's to do with carer stress, and actually it's domestic abuse. So there's quite a lot of new thinking around that. I've remembered what I was going to say, which was there's a piece of work that the Violence Reduction Unit have funded, which is called Developing Healthy Attitudes, and there's an online resource that is currently being updated and expanded that is for schools on all sorts of issues around developing healthy attitudes and healthy relationships that is going to be launched. So we started it in Sheffield in about 2018. And it's been updated and it's going to be pushed out across the county. So that's another bit of work that we're doing on that. But yeah, there's loads to do, really. There's absolutely loads to do. So I think, the key thing for me is coming here is thinking for people to be thinking about, well, violence against women and girls will affect every bit of work we do in the council, really. And just sort of acknowledging that and kind of being aware and being prepared to think about, well, how do we address that in the particular area of work you're doing?
Dawn.
Just to say, Councillor Little, if you've got some specific examples that you've just talked about on antisocial behaviour, if you want to pass those on to us, and we'll make sure that we work with our housing colleagues to try and resolve those issues for the people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, if I may ask you a question. Clearly, a lot of what you've talked about today is the resources behind... Could you turn your phone off? Thank you. You talk a lot about the resources for helping victims and that, and it's quite a very comprehensive list. Is enough being done, in your opinion, to change the mindset of men and boys? Because surely if you can cut it out at the root, that's got to be the way forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's why we've signed up to White Ribbon, because that is about the council saying, actually, we know that there's a problem with the attitudes of some men and boys, not all men and boys, but also it's quite easy to sort of tolerate sexist behaviour in a group setting. And I think, I'm really, really pleased that the council has signed up to White Ribbon, because I think it's the start of us saying, actually we are going to say publicly that we don't want this anymore. We want to actually be an authority that is going to stand up and speak out about those attitudes. So I think that's a really, really good start. And I think if we can encourage our partners across the city to take the same stand, it starts to become more of a kind of, accepted thing that people can do. But yes, I, totally agree that, my colleague whose daughter is 15 is saying in a school in Sheffield that lots of the boys talk about Andrew Tate in a complimentary way, and people like that who just do vile things and talk about vile things do get a massive amount of airtime on social media. And I don't think we either sort of give up and go home because it's too powerful, or we just keep going and just keep trying to challenge those attitudes. I don't, there's no middle ground, is there really?
Dawn.
And obviously we brought the Be That Mate video to the committee last time, so we're engaging young people now in those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for coming in today. Oh, sorry, I've got another question from Marianne.
Just a quick one. Thank you so much. So there was the partnership event in October, wasn't there? Which I think brought different partners together to focus on safety, particularly women and girls. And I think there was an invitation, wasn't there, to businesses who work in the nighttime economy to sign up to that. I just wondered, has there been much take-up on what does that look like in terms of support, and how are they supporting?
Safety of Women at Night Charter. Yeah. Well, that's being led by my colleague Steve Lunya. However, what I do know is that what we're planning to do is we've got it online. I'm not sure how many people have signed up to it, I'm afraid. I can try and find out. But what we are planning to do before the launch of the Best Bar None scheme, which is going to be later on next month, is prepare a champions pack so that anybody who does want to sign up to the Safety at Night charter can have a sort of list of stuff to do. So, for example, the Susie Lamplugh campaign does really fantastic, brief, bite-size training on how to be an active bystander around harassment. So if you see someone being harassed on a bus, if you see someone being harassed in a bar, there's various options that you can think about in terms of, well, what can I do to respond to this? Depending what situation you're in, you could be very direct, or you could actually take a photo and share it to somebody, or you could go and talk to the bus driver. So there's things like that I really want to spread out there, and that training's free and it's excellent. And I'd really encourage anybody who's interested in it to go on the Susie Lamplugh website and find it. But that's the kind of thing that we can put together a resource pack for businesses. Actually, there's a lot of stuff out there now that if you put it all into one place, people might actually, start using it. And there are some really good resources.
Thank you. I've got one final question from Karen.
Sorry, it is really quick on just what you've just said. Somebody sent me a document about the 5 Ds.
Yeah, that's the one.
Is that the one?
Yeah,
And it was so useful to read it, because it was after that conversation I'd had with you. I didn't know what to do in a situation.
Yeah.
And I thought, I could have done all of that. So having read it, it's given me a bit of idea.
Go on the training, because it is really good, and it goes through loads of different scenarios and stuff. So, yeah. It's only an hour.
Well, just again, thank you very much for coming in. That's a lot of good information. Thank you. Okay, the last of the updates is a briefing on the allotment service. You may recall that in our meeting of the 14th of November 2022, we discussed and debated the rent increase proposal, and following that there was a feeling that it would be nice to get a more detailed understanding of what the allotment services actually do. Thank you. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I'm just aware that the lighting is going. Can that curtain be adjusted so that is it possible? Okay.
Rowan, do you want to push your desk back if it's in your face?
I mean, Kerry's, Kerry's doing most
I'm fine, it's not in my eyes. Hello, I'm Kerry Ashton, I'm the allotments manager. So we already circulated a short briefing about the allotment service, which you've had the opportunity to read. So what we're presenting now is...
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Could you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. So we've picked out some points from that to illustrate and expand on slightly in the form of a presentation. So first off, we're a statutory service. The City Council is required to provide allotments for the people of Sheffield. We manage about 3,400 plots spread across the city on approximately 80 sites. We sometimes quote slightly different figures because it does depend what you count. We have some sites that are disused. We have some sites which have within them plots that are disused. We'll come more to that a bit later on. The occupancy at the moment is very high. 95% of the plots which are in a condition that we consider that they could be let are let. Of the 5% that aren't let, most of those are under offer. So in the process of hopefully being let to somebody or us finding a new tenant. We've only a very, very small handful that we've got nobody wanting to take on at the moment. The sites vary massively. We have some which are one plot. Our biggest site is over 400 plots. They vary in their location. Some are more urban than others, vary in all kinds of ways in terms of the facilities that are there and just the feel of the sites. They're hugely valued by our communities. That's been particularly apparent through the pandemic. It's been a real lifeline for a lot of people. And it's a service that's predominantly funded by the rents that we collect from our tenants. We also have a range of community groups across the city, so organisations, either professional or voluntary, that have a plot or more than one plot within our sites for particular groups of people who are better suited to sharing a plot rather than having their own plot, sometimes with quite a bit of support available to them. So the staffing structure, we're a service that operates during the weekdays. We do respond out of hours to emergencies if we can and if that's appropriate, but usually it's Monday to Friday office hours. We're staffed by a team that makes up 3.1 full-time equivalent. We do have part-time members within that team on a job share basis. We have the business support officers who are a 1.1 equivalent between them, 2 allotment officers who equate to 1 full-time post. My post, which substantively is a full-time post, and the full-time post for the allotment ranger. From April there will be a slight change to how that's delivered, but it will still be the same amount of staffing. This is a map. Obviously you won't be able to see the detail, the site names or anything, but just to show how these sites are spread across the city. So I mentioned occupancy is very high at the moment, demand is very high at the moment. Through the pandemic we had a huge surge of people applying for allotments. Things are levelling down a bit now, but demand is still higher than what it was before the pandemic. Which is a fantastic thing in terms of our sites being valued and utilised, but it does mean that there are some areas where people are having to wait longer. Historically, there are always some areas where the lists are longer than others, and we'll come on to what we're doing about that later on. Generally, the southwest and, there's an area there, southwest and south, that should read, of the city, are where the demand is highest, central as well to a degree. So we have at the moment very few sites with any vacancies.
where we do get vacancies, we promote this via our website. To try to address the issue of the high demand for allotments and people waiting, we split plots where we can. A lot of our traditional full-size plots, they are very large. We're finding the people that take on plots now, our customers are more varied. We have a lot of young families who are working, and actually a full plot is too much for a lot of people. Half a plot is quite adequate for a lot of people. So where we can, if a plot comes up, we divide it into two. We also offer the opportunity for people to be registered as a co-worker on a plot. So there's a tenant and then they have somebody who helps them that we formally recognise, and they're entitled to have a key and discuss things with us. If we know that there's a site with a long waiting list and there's another site not too far away with vacancies, we promote those vacancies. We give people the opportunity to go on that site while they're waiting for their chosen site. We use banners to advertise vacancies when we have them. We put posters up on our sites or in local businesses to spread the word. This is just an illustration of where the demand is greatest. So we've got the two large, the red and the sort of orangish red blobs, which is the southwest and the south. This is numbers of people on the waiting list represented by the size of the blobs. That is more evenly spread than it was before the pandemic across the whole of the city. Almost every single site does have waiting lists now. And there's been a slight shift. It used to be the southwest that had the most people waiting, but that's actually been overtaken by the south now. So this is the waiting list taken as of the 31st of March of each year, from 2017-18 up to 2021-2022. The reason we're measuring it at the same time each year is that we know from experience that within a year we have fluctuations. We have times where allotments are more popular. We have times where tenancies change over more. So measuring one date each year, you're able to see the longer term trends. So you can see 2020 to 21, with the height of the pandemic, the huge increase in the waiting list. And then it started to come back down. Obviously, we don't yet have the figure for this year, but as we get to the end of March, I'm anticipating it'll come down a bit more, but still be way ahead of what it was before the pandemic. And this shows the occupancy, so the percentage of the lettable plots which are let each year. Again, this is taken at the 31st of March. We had the dip when we first went into the pandemic, when we were restricted in what activities we could undertake, and we had to put a freeze on letting plots. We've more than caught up on that now, so you can see it dipped down and then it's gone up to higher than what it was before, and it's remaining high and getting slowly higher. I don't know if it would ever be possible to reach 100%. There's always plots changing tenancies, but obviously the closer we can get to that, the better. So this is showing the breakdown of the occupancy of the plots. So the figures that we have been talking about, they were the plots that we considered lettable. This is looking at the plots as a whole, what condition we have assessed them to be in. So the blue, we have the plots which are let, they have tenants on them. Then we have the unlettable plots, the vacant plots and the under offer plots. So it just shows the vast majority are let at the moment. The unlettable, I'll come on to this more, but they're ones, some of them could be brought back into use. Some of them realistically couldn't. They've been woodland for a long time. They have ecological value. They might be in places where there just isn't demand, or they might be land that's no longer suitable for food growing. So there's a separate piece of work to be done there. Do we actually declassify some of those as allotments? It's not been our most urgent project at this time through the pandemic and the surge in demand, but it's something that we'll probably be discussing with you in the future. Going on to budget. So here we're showing how we spend our budget. So the blue, roughly half on employees. The premises, that refers to what we spend on the allotment sites, so routine maintenance, planned site improvements, the supplies and services, so the materials that we use for our ranger, and locks, keys and such. and then the small wedge there, transport us getting around the city. And then the next just shows where our budget comes from, showing that we're predominantly a self-financing service. Rents, we won't labour the points on rents because I think it's been covered extensively when we've looked at future rent increases, but just as a bit of an overview, so typically since 2018-19, rents have been going up in line with inflation. Obviously at the moment inflation is exceptionally high, so this committee took the decision for a smaller than inflation increase for 2024-25. We always have to look a year ahead because of the requirement to give a year's notice to tenants. Our concessions, we give a 75% concession to tenants who have disabilities or a low income. Compared to other local authorities, that is generous. We do consider that to be the right thing, to make the allotments more affordable to those who might struggle most to pay. We used to have a 50% concession across the board for the senior citizens or those on a lower income or with disabilities. That changed when our rents went up considerably in around 2014 to make the move to being a predominantly self-financing service. It was to mitigate against the impact of that for those who would struggle to pay more. But yeah, we think that is still the right thing. 42% of our tenants claim a concession of one form or another. And it's, yeah, as I've said, there's a 75% concession for the low income and disabilities, and it's a 25% concession for senior citizens or full-time students. Rent payment options. We have a number of different ways that people can pay. We're always trying to modernise, make things easier for our customers as well as easier for us, more efficient. We offer the tenants the opportunity to pay by direct debit if their invoice is £40 or more in instalments of £40, or they can choose to pay by direct debit for one single annual payment, just the benefit to them being that they don't have to do anything. We do the work of collecting their payment. If a tenant is struggling to pay all in one go but doesn't want to pay or can't pay by direct debit, they can request a payment plan to spread the cost throughout the year. And different ways they can pay online, by phone, at a pay point or by backs. And we're moving this year for the first time to sending the invoices to tenants by email as default rather than by post. Rents. Comparing our rents to other authorities is complex. People make comments about how our rents compare to other authorities, but if you delve into it, it's very, very difficult to draw those comparisons. Different authorities charge differently. Some charge by the square metre. We charge in size categories. Other authorities charge in size categories, but their categories are different to ours. How water is charged is different. Some sites have water, some don't have water. Different authorities invest in their allotments differently. We do allocate money each year to improving our allotment sites. Some authorities don't do that. We have fairly generous budgets for maintaining the sites, for doing tree work to alleviate shade, to help our plots to be used to full use. Not all authorities do these things in the same way. And as I've already said, our concessions are quite generous. So whilst on the face of it we might look fairly expensive, when you delve into it, it's not that straightforward. One of the things that we are doing where we have opportunities to alleviate the waiting list is creating new allotment sites. We've created several since I've been in post. We are always on the lookout for sites that are suitable for creating new sites on, generally sites that are in council ownership just because of the prohibitive cost of buying land. Our hotspot areas, as I've said, the south, the southwest, parts of central. If any of you, with your knowledge of your local areas, spot sites that you think would be suitable for allotments, please let us know. Our last new site was in 2014. We are very overdue for a new one. We just need to find a suitable site in a suitable place. It needs to be a land that's suitable for food growing, so there's things we have to do like soil testing as well as consulting with the local community. We have investigated a few potential new sites over the last few years which for one reason or another have turned out not to be suitable, but we're absolutely desperate for new sites in appropriate areas. Unfortunately, the areas where we need them most, the land is often, there's fierce competition for it. Another thing we do, clearing plots to bring them back into use. So we have some plots which we might at present deem them to be unlettable, but they could be brought back into use with a not unreasonable amount of work. So we do this via our ranger, via volunteer days, and via contractors during the winter months. When we use contractors, it is costly. The payback for that is sort of quite slow, but it is there. So we do seek to maximise the occupancy by clearing derelict plots. One thing we do have to be mindful of is that demand does fluctuate. Just because a site has a waiting list at the moment doesn't mean that it will do soon. And what we don't want to do is spend money that's wasted. So we're quite strategic about which plots we clear and when. We face some challenges. Big issues at the moment, fly tipping, a couple of sites, really hotspots. It's very costly to deal with. It's difficult to target on some sites, particularly if sites are isolated, if we don't have sort of strong enough links with local communities to be getting the sort of information that helps us to tackle the problems. CCTV, it's a wonderful solution where it's possible. It isn't always possible. We often don't have power to our sites. We don't have locations where you can put cameras where they would have good visibility across sites. And also with such a large estate, we can't have coverage of all of it. We used to have some portable cameras, and having them actually in the right place at the right time to actually catch an offence when it's happening, it's a needle in a haystack situation. We have issues with pests on sites, we have rats, we have programmes to control them on some of our sites. We have avian flu at the moment, keeps coming and going, affecting those of our tenants who keep poultry. They keep having to keep them undercover and separated from wild birds. Site security, keys. A lot of our sites are secure, not all of them. Some of them have footpaths running through them, but where we can secure sites, we do with locks and keys. The older type of locks we use, where it's just like a standard padlock, keys fall into the wrong hands, people copy them. So we're gradually upgrading onto a better locking system where only we can get keys duplicated. It's just easier then to keep control of who's actually accessing our sites. Conflicting aspirations from tenants, quite a broad encompassing statement. We have, at the moment, almost 3,300 customers who we have, a contractual relationship with, and they have interpersonal relationships with each other. There's things that's appropriate for us to get involved in, and there's things that aren't, but there's a lot of things that do take up a lot of our time just with that sort of management of those tenancies and individual issues. Engagement. So we have our allotment advisory group. This is the sort of formal part of our engagement with our customers, which meets 3 times a year at least. The advisory group is made up of councillors, representatives of allotment societies and the Sheffield Allotment Federation. So that's where we consult on most proposed changes, where we discuss site improvements, things like that. We have a lot of contact beyond that with the allotment societies and the Allotment Federation about more sort of localised issues. We have our annual allotment competition, which is it's a really big positive event in our calendar. It's enjoyed a lot by a lot of our tenants. It's a really nice thing for us as a team as well to just spend a week focusing on all the good things that are happening rather than the issues. It's really quite uplifting. We do some consultation with all of our tenants, not just the advisory group, if we're looking at any changes that are much broader. So there's a piece of work we're doing at the moment on reviewing our strategy, our policies, procedures, tenancy agreement and handbook. That will be something we consult with the whole of our tenants on. And when we were discussing with you recently the proposed rents for 2024-25, although we weren't required to consult with all of our tenants, we did do in that instance. We felt that was the right thing to do to really get a better picture of the feel of the wider allotment community. We have site visits and inspections where we're out there on the ground and seeing our tenants one-to-one, and a great deal of contact with our tenants by email and by phone and our site. We do make a lot of people happy. It's easy to get bogged down with all the problems that we face, but we do get a lot of nice comments from our tenants. We know what the allotments mean to a lot of our tenants. It's not all doom and gloom, just some quotes of some of the nice things that people have said recently. And just to note as well, the sort of historic cultural element of the allotments. We've had allotments in Sheffield for a very long time. Some of our sites have been around for a long time. Mearsbrook allotments, the largest site, had a centenary a few years ago. There's a lady called Margaret Bolton, who is one of our tenants. She's written a book on the history of allotments in Sheffield. She consulted our archive material for that. It's extremely interesting. She knows a lot more about that than I do. She spent a lot of time researching it, but it's really interesting. And also the pigeon keeping. It's a fairly small part in terms of numbers of tenancies of the allotment estate, but we do have some plots and sites designated to pigeon keeping, and that's a really significant cultural thing to Sheffield. Very, very serious and very competitive as well. Our allotment societies I've mentioned a few times. A big thank you to them all. We have some very, very dedicated individuals who do so much for their sites. They work in partnership with us. They carry out viewings for potential new tenants. They support new tenants. They have social activities. They do practical events on site. Some of them have shops. Some of them have starter plots projects where they support incoming tenants who don't yet have their own plot to just work a small piece of land with advice and support. It makes such a difference. The sites that have a really strong, thriving allotment site, we tend to see a much higher success rate of new tenancies, just because of that community feel and having that help and advice and support there if you need it. So beneficial. They're a real asset to us. One thing that we're looking at with our societies at the moment, self-management. One thing I didn't mention when we were talking about rents and different ways that different authorities charge and how they arrive at their figures is that we're all direct managed. So we as the City Council manage all of our allotment sites. In some authorities, almost all the sites are run by allotment societies. Some of them it's a mix. It varies from area to area, but we're very unusual in that we look after all of our sites ourselves. Historically, there's just not really been an appetite for societies to run their own sites, but that tide seems to be turning a little bit. We've got a meeting later this month with one of our sites where the society is interested in piloting self-management. With it being something that's new to us in Sheffield, we'll need to devise exactly how that works, what sort of agreement is drawn up between us and them, what they do, what level of autonomy they have, to what degree they have to follow our policies and procedures. So no doubt that's something that will be coming back to this committee in the future to cover in more detail. I've touched on the big piece of work we're doing at the moment, the review of our strategy, our policies and procedures, our tenancy agreement, our handbook. So it's a huge piece of work. It's basically reviewing, the documents that underpin everything that we do. So again, that's something that we'll be coming back to in more detail. We have the strategy in its early stages. We're progressing steadily with everything else in consultation with volunteers from the societies and the Federation. And another thing that we'll be likely coming back to with yourselves soon, our policy on burning on sites. This is something we've been discussing quite some time now with our advisory group. At the moment, tenants are permitted to have bonfires at certain times of the year. Some local residents object to this, some tenants object to this. Among the allotment community, opinions are quite divided. We already have a lot of restrictions in place on what tenants can burn on their plots. They're not allowed to bring waste on. They can only burn dry, woody matter. But even so, it causes concerns to people. We've done a piece of work over the last year to actually get some evidence to help guide any future decisions on this, looking at the air quality at Mearsbrook allotments, our largest site. Excuse me. 2 separate studies were done there. We've just had the results in and discussed them at our advisory group. We're now in the process of devising what proposal we might put forward to yourselves. So that's, again, something that we'll be coming back to very soon. We're linked in with other local authorities. I've talked a few times about how different authorities charge their rent differently and so on and so forth. We have colleagues in other authorities that we consult with to share best practice, just to bounce ideas off each other. That's often via APSI or just direct contact with officers that we've built up relationships with. We also have a forum now and then via the providers of the database that we use. So that's quite interesting to talk to other people that use that same system. And finally, some nice pictures just showing some of our lovely plots and some of our lovely tenants enjoying their plots.
Thank you very much for the most comprehensive presentation. I certainly know a lot more about the allotment service now than I did a while back. Got a few questions. I'll take Tony and then Sue.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kerry. Very good. I really enjoyed that. It explained a lot of things that I was unsure about anyway. The one thing I wanted to pick up on is next to the last slide, I think it was, and that is you mentioned bonfires on sites. Now, some sites are close to residential areas. You mentioned Mearsbrook, the one at Moss Way where I am. I have had complaints about people burning certain times of the day. Now, there used to be a bylaw, I don't know if it still exists, where you couldn't light a fire before 6 o'clock in the evening. I don't know if that still exists. But are your societies and tenants aware of when it's permitted to burn? I know it's a great thing to be able to burn rubbish because that's one way, but it's just when you're close to residential areas, it sometimes annoys residents who perhaps have got no interest in allotments. You know what I mean? Thank you.
We have quite detailed guidance in the allotment handbook of when tenants can burn, factors they should consider to avoid nuisance to people nearby. Understanding and compliance, I'd say, is probably variable. We do work very hard with our societies to try to enforce as strongly as we can the policies that we have at the moment. Some people find it maybe not black and white enough, so maybe we'll look towards something simpler, clearer, easier to enforce. Does that cover it?
Yeah. Sue.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and that has filled in a few gaps. I know when we were asked to make the decision about the charges on allotments, I know I was one of those people who said, really, we need more information before we're asked to make these decisions. So I have particularly noted, even though it isn't in your written report that you put on the slides, the crucial bits of information that we needed, which is that we have a 75% concession rate for people on low income, and that 42% of people access that, and that we have a 25% concession rate for some other groups. So I think it's really sort of important learning that when we come to review the charges next time, I think we need to have that sort of information along with the comparators, I think, about the other authorities and how they charge, because we may want to do something completely different. The other thing I noticed that it says you're in the process of reviewing the council's allotment strategy. I'm just a bit confused, because I thought that it was the policy committee's role to request the review, rather than us to just see the review when it was finished, so that we could engage in that review. So I'm just wondering how we as a committee are being engaged in that review, or because that is the purpose of policy committees, to look at policies. Thanks.
I think Lisa will take that.
sorry, on behalf of the service, as with the burials and cremation policy, we will be absolutely involving the committee in that work. I think what Kerry's alluding to is we recognise that there are a number of policies that we have in the council that have not been looked at for many years, and the allotments is one of them. So yes, we will absolutely be engaging this committee and local area committees as well in designing those policies and taking them forward.
I've got Alan and then Bernard. So Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's again, the last question. Yeah, reviewing in the allotment strategy and policies, have you got timescales for this and when will it be completed? How far on are you with it?
So in terms of the policies that will dictate what goes in the tenancy agreement and the handbook, any changes that we make, we have to give tenants a year's notice as of the 1st of April. So we're not going to have that completed in time to give people a year's notice for them to come in force next year, 2024. So the aspiration will be to give tenants notice before the 1st of April 2024 in order that they can come into force 2025. So it'll be through the course of the coming year. We'll be completing all the consultation, the revisions, they're going through legal equalities and so on and so forth.
Sorry, Councillor Little. Yeah, so there's the tenants handbook, so things like burning on allotments, those kind of things will be done in consultation with yourselves, with the Allotment Federation, and will feed into that tenants handbook as well. I just also want to point out that there is a section in the briefing that Kerry produced that does give a little bit of information around other local authorities' prices and how they compare with Sheffield's. Not in great detail, but there's a little bit in there that we can point to, and we can give more information on that next time.
I think my point was that it needs to come alongside the changes in the charges. We need that information at that point.
I think that the fires policy may need probably reviewing as a separate entity before that time with climate change and everything that's going off. I represent the wards in the north of Sheffield on the Lack as well, and there's one little single dot. If you look, I'm surprised that there's no waiting list for allotments up there. We've got one small allotment that covers 2 wards, and most of the people I think go down to Ribbling or other places, and because of transport issues now it's becoming really difficult for people to get around.
Sorry, whereabouts did you say? Whereabouts is that? Where's the one?
That would be High Green, Burncross, Grenoside, Ecclesfield.
So Burncross, we have a site. It is a bit of a gap around there. If there was an opportunity for another site in that area, it's something that we'd look at. In the north of the city, we had the Brackenmore site in Stocksbridge back in about 2012. That's the latest new site that we've had in that area.
That's about 10 miles away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the distances will get quite vast as you get out that way. There was consideration of a new site in Uterbridge some years ago. Before my time, I don't know all the details, but for one reason or another, the council didn't take it forward, but a community group did. So there is a growing space there that people can access, but it's not one of our sites. But certainly if there was an opportunity for us to put a site in Burncross that was suitable, that's something that we would look at or in the surrounding areas.
Yeah, I just note as well in our question, but the last site that you actually put on was 2014, which is coming on for 9 years away. I think with the current situation with finances and everything else and demand for land, I can't see in the foreseeable future any more sites coming on. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. We've got some ideas in the back of our mind that we're not ready to share yet. We are desperate for a new site. It has been too long. Most recent ones that we've considered, one of them we did soil testing and it wasn't suitable for food growing. Another we did consultation and there was a very strong objection from the local community, and we decided it wasn't worth trying to continue with that particular location. The trouble is finding land in the right places where we need it. Sometimes we have people approach us with land that is available and it's just not where we need new sites, whereas in the places where we do need new sites, the land is so so sought after. So it is really tricky, but I wouldn't give up hope. Hopefully we'll have some more positive news for you before too long.
Yeah, thank you. I think at the earliest opportunity when you have got potential sites, it would be good if you could inform and work with the local councillors. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Alan. I've got 3 more people who've indicated to speak. I'm conscious of time, so unless anybody else, I'm going to limit it to those 3 people. They are Bernard, Marianne, and then Peter to finish off, please.
Thank you very much, very informative. Potato blight and other contagious diseases that can, spread by with the wind or in the soil or water. What measures are in place to help those allotment holders? For example, potato blight, whether you get the blight when the plant is in full bloom, as it were, and you've got an enormous amount of wet green material that if you start, you try to set a light to it, it creates a huge amount of smoke. What on earth do people do about that? Because it can, it will ruin crops.
It is a problem, and we're encountering more of these problems. What we generally do is we seek advice from our ecology unit. They give us advice that we can pass on to tenants of the best actions that they can take. Sometimes it's diseases we have, sometimes it's pests. So it will vary case by case, but it's a case of us passing on advice from our experts.
Yeah, it's just that, you are faced, as an allotment holder, you are faced with this problem of what do you do with this mound of stuff that needs to be got rid of and made safe very quickly. Where are you advising these? What do you advise that you do it?
It will depend. Some people do burn when stuff is dry enough, and this is one of the things that often comes up when we have the discussions about what are we going to do about burning in the future. People say, well, how are we going to get rid of diseased materials? Some people do just bag it up and bin it, but then depending on the circumstance, that's not always appropriate in terms of risks of spreading things. So it just varies case by case. It's probably something we'll talk about in more detail when we're talking about the burning.
Do we have a facility to take rubbish away?
We have a skip which our ranger uses. Generally, it's not so much for green waste, it's for things like metal, glass, things that are compostable. We encourage tenants to compost, but obviously some disease things you can't compost. But yeah, that's what we have in terms of rubbish. And we do sometimes provide skips to sites as well. If we know we've got a lot of new tenants coming in and they're often inheriting waste from previous tenants, we put skips on for tenants to use.
Thank you. Marianne.
Thanks. I was just going to make a comment on the burning and air pollution, but I'm on the allotments advisory group. Is it okay to comment? Yeah, hi. Thanks. So it was just to be clear that in the December meeting we had 2 reports presented to us. One was to look at nitrogen oxide and one was to look at 2.5 particulate matter. The nitrogen oxide report was inconclusive, but typically this type of air pollution comes from vehicle pollution. But the PM 2.5 is the main pollutant emitted from smoke and fires. And this is particularly damaging because the particles are really fine and they enter your lungs. And that report was pretty conclusive. So it'd be really welcome if we could have these reports presented to us when we're looking at that policy. And obviously I think it goes without saying that any restrictions need to be talked about in conjunction with composting options and how to deal with diseased plants and that sort of thing.
Finally, Peter.
Just a dilemma we have in Brightside. In Grimesthorpe, we've got an allotment site that can't be used. It was a private one. And 20, 30 years ago, all the allotment holders were encouraged to purchase their plot to prevent it being developed. Unfortunately, over the last 30 years, they've all gone and died off. And nobody knows how we can get back into it because nobody knows who owns the little plots. I have one girl who says, my granddad had one, so I know he got it somewhere. Is there any way you suggest we could get that back in order? Because I say it must be, they're all in individual ownerships.
At Grimesthorpe, did you say?
Grimesthorpe, yes.
Yeah, I've heard mention of the site. It's not one I actually know. It's difficult. I know of another couple of sites across the city, similar situation where individuals have owned plots. They've passed away. Families haven't realised. I'm not sure. I think it's one maybe to talk to property services and legal. I don't know by what means we could acquire that land legally. Planning would probably be on our side, given that it's land that's being used as allotments. It maybe would have restrictions to stop it being used for other things. It's just a case of what the process is for us to get hold of that land if we can.
The irony is Parks is currently investing some money into improving all the walkthroughs, but the allotments is just alongside just overgrown, which is a shame, really. Anyway, I'll chase it.
Let's speak again, and I'll do some investigating.
Right, thank you very much. Did you want to speak, Alan?
Yeah.
Final.
Yep. Perhaps if you try the land registry at Nottingham, they will have all that information of land ownership.
A good point to finish on. Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much for your presentation. That's, as I say, very comprehensive, very informative. We've had 3 briefing sessions today with a lot of information. What I'm asked to make sure is that members get copies of those presentations. I mean, the report you wrote, which we saw earlier, was very good, but you've added things to it, and I think it's important that people get that. Because of our very detailed presentations, we are running a little bit late, so I'm going to ask if we can keep going till potentially 5 o'clock, if that's okay with the committee. Nobody dissenting, so we will go.
Can we have just a 5-minute powder my nose break?
Well, shall we have a little 5-minute break now?
Yeah, please.
I look forward to seeing you when you come back with that. Okay, thank you. Welcome back. Item 11 is the first of our 2 items which require a formal decision. The first is on public health parks investment.
Hi, so Stuart Turney here. I'm a service manager in Parks and Countryside, presenting the report. So here, I'll not go through the report line by line because I don't think we've got time, but the key points in relation to the spending principles I'll just quickly cover. And obviously the purpose of the report is to seek committee kind of support for the continuation of the extending the use of those spending principles for public health funding going forward. And obviously the purpose of how we're using the public health funding is really it's about sustaining and improving the quality of the green spaces in Sheffield in areas of the city that need it most. So the actual recommendations is obviously to continue with the existing spending principles, but also that on an annual basis we'll bring a briefing to the committee which will outline, detail the projects that will be brought forward in each of the years of the public health funding. So so that plan will have kind of the spend profile for that particular year. So that we'll be here again with more information on specific projects. I've got a picture or a map which just kind of highlights why we've, which I think the inequality across the city is core to where we want to focus the public health funding on the 30% most deprived neighbourhoods as recognised by the indices of multiple deprivation. And I think the map here, which kind of has those areas highlighted in yellow, 30% IND, with the quality map of the green spaces of the city, which obviously red meaning that they don't pass the quality standard, which is our standard called the Sheffield standard, and the green areas being they attain, and we're sustaining those quality standards on those sites. So So that's a really kind of important kind of aspect to the principles, and I'll just quickly cover the other ones. So it's 30% most deprived neighbourhoods. All typologies of green space in the city will be covered, public open spaces. Obviously, we're looking at capital improvements to address quality issues, sustain and attain the Sheffield standard. We also want to kind of use this funding to kind of make the funding work for the people that most need it by attracting in further funding on the back of that. And we've got many examples through the projects that we're delivering currently, especially the Parkwood Springs project, which is a £1.2 million initiative, which has got £150,000 of public health funding as part of that. So really kind of opening doors to delivering really big change on site. So that's where it's really powerful. And then we've also got gaps in recreational provision. A good example of that would be the Mather Road Playground project that we're currently in the process of approving to go on site later this summer, where we'll be creating a new playground there where there hasn't been one for a number of years. Infrastructure improvements. We often talk about the power of the path in terms of access and inclusion. Having a good, safe, accessible network across a green space is really important for people of all abilities to be able to access and use these sites safely. So again, infrastructure improvement is a kind of core to the quality of sites as well. Services and facilities, that could be toilets and cafes, again, really important for inclusion and accessibility of sites, and also drawing people into sites and making them be able to stay longer in a comfortable way. So Bruneloo is often how we call that. And obviously there's the council officer resources needed to facilitate good quality and successful project delivery. So on that point, can you show me the next map? So this is just an indication of the type of project, the location of the projects that we've delivered and the types of sites that it covers across the city of Sheffield. Mainly obviously focusing on the east, northeast and southeast, but not exclusively. So we've done 37 green space projects which have public health funding as part of them. 26 of those have been completed. 5 of them are partially in delivery, so they're on site now, such as the Parkwood Springs example I've already mentioned. And also we've got 5 projects which are about to start on site in the next, some this month going through to June and July this year. So, and Mather Road is an example of one of those sites about to come on site. And then 3 further ones which are in development. So it really kind of highlights the kind of the wealth of work that the team have been doing to improve the quality of spaces. And some of the information in the report kind of highlights what benefit that has brought. For example, in terms of the Sheffield standard, there's been a 20% increase in the quality standards in the east area of the city as a result of the work in terms of the projects that we've delivered there and quality improvements made. I know there might be questions around the impact of this, so I'll not go too much into that, but there is a lot of research that these principles were based on, including the I1 report from Sheffield University, which is something, the acronym I find very hard to remember, which I'll come to in a minute. But basically that is really kind of highlighting the key kind of interventions that we're currently working on with the public health funding as having the most benefit to communities in terms of getting them to feel comfortable to use and feel welcome within a green space. So going back to the recommendations, as I said at the beginning, what we're trying to deliver here is a continuation of the principles. We'll obviously focus the money on the key areas of the city, but also trying to attract in additional funding to maximise the benefits that those communities can have, and obviously the quality of the environments that we are trying desperately to make where we currently have poor quality. Ellesmere Park might be a really good example of that. It doesn't pass the Sheffield standard. We've got a significant project coming up this summer to help revitalise that site, and for that £200,000 investment, about £50,000 of public health. £200,000 sounds like a lot of money, but for a site like Ellesmere Park, you need way more than that to really kind of make that really step change of difference that the community deserve and need. So it's the start of a journey, I think, often this money. So public health funding going into sustaining those the delivery against the principles already established, in the context and the context by which we find ourselves in the next 4 years, we were using that to kind of judge the right way of detailing the projects that will come forward on an annual basis. And obviously we'll be working with ward councils, with communities, consultation, to ensure that we design those projects in a way that's appropriate and maximise the benefits for those communities.
Thank you very much. A number of people have indicated they wish to ask questions or comments. I'll start with Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Stuart, thank you very much for the presentation. Been around a long time, both of us together, various projects. I think, yeah, predominantly the money's gone where it should go. Ask a few questions really about the data that you use is from 2015. And that would have been probably 1-2 years gathered before then, so it's probably 10 years old now. How confident are you that that's still good? And then I'd ask the question of pockets of deprivation. Are we dealing here with wards or neighbourhoods? That's the question. And the money, it's a year-on-year allocation. Did it start in 2018? And how long is it going on for? Is it year-on-year for whenever, or is there a finish before it's reviewed again by government or whoever? And then I would ask you just a question about Ecclesfield Park. The pavilion was demolished some years ago. There's no facilities there for sports, no changing facilities. How far are you on with that project, with the Ecclesfield project? Perhaps it's something you may need to come back to me away from here, this meeting, and we can look at that. But thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. I'll take a couple of your questions, if that's okay. Unfortunately, there's an error on the previous slide, and the indices of deprivation was used from the 2019 data, originally from the 2015, and then that was updated in 2019, so apologies for that. And it will be refreshed again when the next indices of deprivation is refreshed, which is every 4 years, I believe.
So yeah. This map here actually shows the 2019 data.
Yeah.
The red version on the other map shows the 2015 data. So that map showing all the projects was just done on the older IMD picture. I need to update it onto the yellow one.
If I could come back on something else, well, you say that the money has to be spent in the area of deprivation. In some areas, they have no open space, green space in that particular neighbourhood. Can it be stretched where the people actually go? So the children, young people actually may go to a park outside that particular area of deprivation, but that's the only provision that can be afforded to that community.
Yeah, there is. Sorry. There is margins where the a good example might be Hillsborough Park and Bowman Drive are two examples of projects which I think are on the edge of IM in the area, but the catchment of those particular parks draws people in from high IMD areas. So yes, we do take that into consideration, and especially for youth facilities where people do travel further. Bowman Drive, where we've kind of weatherproofed, as it were, by taking the gravel out and tarmacking the full bike track. Has been a fabulous kind of improvement. It's created a kind of a 12 months of a year facility in all weathers, and obviously it draws people in from far and wide. Yeah.
I've got Sue and then Karen.
Sorry.
Do you want me to answer the question on the funding?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's council public health funding. So it's from Greg Fell's area, from that public health funding. Currently, we anticipate this being a year-on-year indefinitely. However, it's as indefinite as the council and public health budgets will allow. So yeah, we do anticipate this being in year-on-year, but until such time as the budgets get reduced or directed to be spent in other areas. But currently, in consultation with Greg Fell as Director of Public Health, we still see the use of this funding in the green spaces and open spaces as an investment in improving those health inequalities and health and wellbeing. So there's no plan to change that currently.
And in terms of the Ecclesfield question, we have the Ecclesfield Park regeneration project, which included the tennis courts area and the playground around the bandstand. All of that work is starting towards the end of February, early March. That's when the contractors will be hopefully starting on site for the Ecclesfield Recreational Improvements Project. In terms of your question around the actual pavilion and the loss of that, we are working with colleagues on youth relating to Youth Investment Fund. This is a potential site also for a facility that could provide some of those facilities that have been lost previously in Ecclesfield Park, but they're very exploratory ideas at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Sue and then Karen and then Peter.
Thank you. Thanks for this presentation. I mean, overall, I would generally sort of absolutely support this as a way of going forward, but I do have one or two questions on your report. So the first thing is, do we have any evidence that where we've used this funding, we've actually increased the amount of activity, the amount of people using that particular facility? Because having some feedback like that would actually give everybody reassurance that what we're actually doing is definitely the right thing. Can we also be reassured that where we're using public health funding, this is over and above the level of funding that would be provided across the city, if you like, if we were just looking at an even spread to support the park. So this is additional support. I also note that on the back you talk about a customer satisfaction survey and what sort of things people were wanted, and I just wondered, how was that done? When was that done? Is that something that relates specifically to these areas, or is that a more general? Was that a more general survey? And finally, just to go back, because you answered some of my questions when you answered Alan, but I don't know if you actually defined what a neighbourhood is. Is it a ward or is it a part of a ward? Because there are some wards in this city that have significant areas of deprivation, and yet, on average, the ward probably wouldn't fall into that category, if that makes sense.
So I'll just answer that last part of your question around the wards. So we're using, as per the map, we're using the indices of deprivation. So that breaks it down to, it's not by ward, it's by neighbourhood, by urban area. So that's what we're using to inform the top 30% of the neighbourhoods that we want to use this money in.
So how big is a neighbourhood? What would I understand as a neighbourhood?
Right, so for instance, Stocksbridge, Darnall, Ecclesfield, parts of Hillsborough, Ward, so around the Wisewood area. So it's the conurbations in Sheffield that we are referring to.
So they're actually varying sizes then, because Stocksbridge is a huge area by comparison with...
So if we've shared the map with you, you can break that down to the areas in the map. You can see the shading on the map indicates the areas within there. So if you take the Hillsborough ward as a whole, which is a large area, there are only parts of that ward that are in the areas of deprivation. The same with Stocksbridge. But what we tend to find when we look in more detail is the areas of, I'm talking about Stocksbridge as an example, the areas of the highest health inequalities and deprivation are where people live, and there's a huge amount of rural estate around the area, the same in Bradfield. Those areas don't suffer the same amount of deprivation in terms of the indices of multiple deprivation, but the areas, the urban area where people, where the housing areas are situated is where we're trying to do the interventions. Does that help?
And just from a detailed perspective, it's using LSOA areas, and I can't tell you what those are right now, and if you want more information, I can provide that afterwards.
It's lower socio-economic.
Okay.
Output areas, yeah.
Oh, yes, so then evidence of increased use. Is that the next one? Right, so yeah, for certain projects we have done kind of before and after survey type work. We've worked with, in some cases, universities to assess the level of use. So we've got a project at Duchess Road Basketball Court, which was an earlier renewal project as part of the public health funding, where Hallam University's sports science group have got cameras on site which monitor the level of use in a non-invasive way, as it were, to show how the peaks and flows of how that site is now being well used. So we do have that very detailed evidence, which we have to go to the Hallam University to get. We've done Hillsborough Park for the pump track there. We've done before and after survey work looking at the significant increase in use of that facility, well, of the park and therefore that facility as a result of that new intervention on that site. And I think that's also been helped by having the toilet and the cafe facility also created by Coach House. The Norfolk Heritage Park, where there was a significant, like £300,000 regeneration of the playground there. Again, there was a lot of working with the university to do survey work on a whole range of measures to see how people's behaviour had changed as a result of that project.
Okay, does that answer your question, Sue? Thank you. Karen. Oh, sorry, Lisa.
Just going back to Councillor Alston's question on the neighbourhoods and how the indices of multiple deprivation. There's quite a lot of information on the .gov website that I'll be happy to collate a summary of and share that, so it can explain how the neighbourhood data is arrived at and how you can actually get further information on each of those neighbourhoods. So I'll be quite happy to share that, so we can tell you.
So, for example, Mossborough Ward on the map is a big horseshoe of whatever pale colour it is, and then a big red blob of an, you know, and would that area, the red area, which is obviously meets the criteria, would that be sufficient an area to allow you to invest money in that area, given that overall the whole ward doesn't? That's what I was really trying to get at.
And the answer to that is yes. And going back to the Stocksbridge example, there is a pocket of deprivation where housing is situated, and I would imagine that is a similar situation in the Mossborough Westfield area. And I think Councillor Downing has been involved in discussions around that. So it's looking at what provision there is in those areas, what we've already got, the quality of it, and how it can be improved. And actually, with external grant funding as well, there is a case to say, well, if there isn't any facilities, if there aren't, facilities, or there isn't any green space, how can we create that as well, by accessing external funding as well, because obviously we've got limited resources from the public health money. So yeah, absolutely, you would be looking at those red areas and looking what the provision is and trying to improve that.
Okay, yes, question about customer satisfaction survey. The Parks and Countryside survey it's biannual, as that means every 2 years, I think. So we try and do one every 2 years to get the trends of how people feel about green open spaces, but also sign of the times about what are people's concerns or interest in green spaces, because obviously that evolves and changes over time. And obviously the COVID pandemic was a really good example of how people value their green spaces way more and use them way more. And some of that still continues to this day as a result. And again, that kind of interest and value in local green spaces, not needing to travel far to experience a good quality green space is really important.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, just to say, I can't find a reason not to carry on doing what we're doing. It's the right thing to do. Just two quick questions. One is around mental health, and you'll know that we've put a mental health totem in Fretchville Pond, and it wasn't a lot of money for what it is, and it is being well used, my understanding. So I just wondered about if we could roll that out across Sheffield, because I know Newcastle have. So I think for a little bit of money, I think that would add value for people. And it's all about, for anybody that doesn't know, it's just about taking 10 minutes and taking 10 minutes out to look and listen to your environment, which usually you're walking around thinking about all the issues you've got. It's an app that about QR code that you scan. But a lot of people walking around thinking about the issues that they've got and don't really relax and everything, and this is supposed to, so it has been working. So one was that. The second one was in your report, you mentioned Bowman Drive, which is in my ward. It says 4 wheels park, so I didn't know, it's a BMX track, and as far as I'm concerned, it's 2 wheels, but if anybody wants to argue with that one. The thing that I just wanted to, it's a fantastic facility and everything. We are getting emails about complaints, not particularly about that, but it's about the football pitches at the side, and I've had another one in today from supposedly representing all households in the area about parking. So when we're doing these facilities, I think we have to look at the impacts and what we can do to try and mitigate them. And I don't know how that comes under this funding or what we do about it. But, it's great making a facility really good and getting more and more people using it, but the impacts on the people that live in that area can be extreme as well. And if they're having to drive to it, then bring more cars, which tends to combat on climate and everything else, isn't it? So I just wanted to see how we manage that. Thank you.
Yeah, when we talk about all wheels, we mean scooters can use them, because for BMX tracks which are tarmac, it basically means you can go on your bicycle, you can go on a skateboard, you can go on a scooter as well. So and that's also the value that the Hillsborough Park one as well. It's got learn to ride areas as well as more advanced, quite advanced bumps to go on as well. Yes, and Totem, like the idea of we can have a look at that as well. And obviously Freshville Pond is another one of those sites which is soon to be on site and finally going to get its regeneration, which is great. What was the last one? Traffic, yes. Some of the project work, we've been doing a lot of work at Shirebrook Valley, improving the visitor centre and the environmental areas around there, and access routes as well. Part of that access is also going into improving the car parking facilities as well, to make, as part of making that kind of entrance area welcoming and accessible to all. So it's not that we wouldn't, but obviously the focus is on the kind of, I guess, more direct aspects of how public health can be improved through the recreational improvements and the quality improvements within a green space. Sometimes that does include the car parking facilities as well, and we do need to consider that, because, like I say, sports facilities, Parkwood Spring, at a lot of our sports sites, the traffic inundation at the weekend can be very upsetting for local residents.
Come back and say it causes a lot of stress, which is what we're trying to get away from. So and pollution. So if there's anything that can be done.
Okay, just before I bring Peter in, it's clear you've spent the whole of Christmas thinking up questions, because all of you. I'm conscious of time. Just as an insurance, I don't intend to be here at 5:30. Can I seek your agreement that we extend for another half hour if necessary, to be fair to the people who are at the end of the agenda, just so they have sufficient time? Is that okay?
Are you saying till 5:30? Can't stay. No, till 5:30. Oh, well, I think Sue's saying she can't stay, but there's supposed to be another meeting in here at 5 o'clock.
You better crack on then.
Yeah.
Peter and then Bernard.
Just a quick, on your map with all the flags, you didn't put a point into Grimesthorpe. Yet I've had some indication that some money is going to be invested in that wreck on Winterbank Lane there. Yes. It didn't go on showing your map, that's all. You got me worried.
Yeah. Yes, this is about public health funding. We have got Levelling Up Parks Fund for Winterbank Hill and the open space there.
Bernard.
Not. You're unaware of it.
I'm looking at page 36 under climate implications. And my first, there's two questions here. One, we're talking here about an approach to green spaces and public health funding expenditure. Now, in the area where I live, Walkley, there's several areas of really tall building, tall tower blocks. In one of that area, around the university, for example, Brightmoor Drive, the area is, there are lots of children in that area with families. What are you saying that that area around it, which I understand is housing land, will be regarded as as a green space, and money would be allowed, you know, we would prioritise an area like that, say, rather than, you know, an area that, you know, has already got wildlife. I'm just struggling with local people who want access to green space, who live in is a 24 floor block with young children wanting and parents wanting somewhere to sort of dig a plot, as it were, which is within, you know, trike distance of the bottom of their block. Is that what we're talking about within the general approach we're talking about here?
I think that the general approach that we've taken with public health funding is to based on the map, is that looking at the quality of our spaces across the city, looking at the areas that we can invest public health funding within that quality map, and then focusing on trying to uplift the quality, not just of the site, but of the recreational facilities available to people in those sites. That possibly could include I don't know if you talked about the incidental space around tower blocks. For example, where we've got Ponderosa Park, we've got 3 tower blocks there, and that obviously that green space there is super important to those local communities, and a lot public health funding has been used to improve the access routes to make that site a lot safer, as well as the play and gym equipment type facilities on that site. So that's just an example of one of the sites.
I'm talking about actually immediately around Brightmoor Drive, which is separate to Ponderosa, which is already a green space and has got a green community working there. I'm just saying on housing land, when you've got areas of, you know, areas that often look quite desolate or windswept. These are areas, you know, where I live, that is an area of high deprivation. And I would have thought an area like that should have high priority to be improved, so that the young people and, you know, the older people, the people in that area can benefit from this strategy. At the moment, I don't see anything here that would specifically go to that. I just feel, you know, housing land is regarded differently to park land, and I'd like that to be sort of a start to change that.
So your assumption is actually correct. This funding is specifically around improving the green spaces, play facilities, infrastructure that we already have, and looking at potentially putting new facilities into areas, for instance, Westfield as an example, where there wasn't a play area. I think we would need to speak to our colleagues in housing and look at the housing revenue account and how that can help to fund improvements around the areas that are particularly sort of tower areas, social housing and so on. So this funding, Councillor Little, is specifically for the existing parks and countryside estate, for want of a better description. To have that conversation, we can take that away and speak to our colleagues in the housing team to look at that and come back with an answer for you on how that might be funded.
If we can, because this is desperately needed, absolutely desperately needed.
It's not within the remit of this funding.
Excuse me, I'm very conscious of the time. I know you had another question, Bernard, but I really would like to close this and get the recommendation. Is that okay? If you'd like to submit your further question, and I'm sure you'll get a good response. So, okay, on that basis, nobody's got any more questions. The recommendation is that the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee approve the extension of the spending principles for Parks and Countryside's public health funding as described in this report to enable continued investment and renewal of Sheffield's parks and countryside sites, approve the spend profile for the funding as described in this report, and request an annual brief to this committee on the investment plan as specific projects and opportunities are identified. Are we all agreed? Thank you. That has been unanimously passed. Thank you very much for your report. Okay. Second item for formal decision is the participation in North West and Yorkshire Book Consortium. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Hilary Coulson, Interim Head of Libraries and Archives. I'll just let my colleague introduce herself because I realise she doesn't have a name tag for you.
I'm Alison Joby, I'm Central Collections Manager.
Hi. So today we're seeking a decision from the committee to continue our existing arrangements to negotiate with suppliers as part of a book buying consortium. So specifically, we're looking to continue to commission our library books and other materials for the service for the next 3 years as part of a joint arrangement for the North West and Yorkshire Book Consortium. I'm not going to go through the report line by line, but if I just give you a brief summary. So currently the council is part of a North West and Yorkshire Book Consortium, so that combines the spending power of around 36 local authorities. The purpose of that is to basically procure more favourable discounts from our suppliers than if we procured on our own. So that means that we're better placed to use our materials fund, so that's the budget that we have for books and other items, to buy lending items so we can have got a greater choice within our libraries. The procurement kind of framework doesn't tie us to particular suppliers, it doesn't tie us to specific books or anything, so we still have choice within that. What it does is it just means that we are able to lever a greater discount from our suppliers. And what that means is, as well as having that for the libraries that the council runs, we can also offer those discounted terms to our volunteer libraries, so both the associate and the co-delivered libraries, to buy on those discounted basis. So the current arrangements, which have been in place for about 9 years, and before that we worked on a Yorkshire basis, are due to end in May 23. So again, just to kind of reconfirm, the decision that we're asking from the committee is to seek the authority to continue to commission on that basis as part of the North West and Yorkshire Book Consortium for the next 3 years. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Wall of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. The recommendation is that the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee approve the commissioning and purchase of library books and other materials for the next 3 years until 2026/27 through a joint arrangement with the North West and Yorkshire Book Consortium. Is that agreed? And that was agreed unanimously. Right, our final item today, and I apologise for keeping you here all this time, is a revenue budget monitoring report for month 8. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting. So this is a standing item to bring the committee up to date with the current outturn position for the revenue account for the council and the committee specifically. So the last time you had an update was back in November, and you got the September numbers. This is currently the November numbers, so month 8 position. We started in January producing these numbers for the rest of the committees, so by the time we get to the end of the cycle, it's fairly out of date, but it's in line with the rest of the committee's information that they've had. So it is a steadily improving position, but it's still a significant overspend for the authority. The overall council position is 17.1 million overspent, again, outturn position. That's better than last month by 1.6 million. So at month 7, we were reporting 18.7 million overspend. The main areas for overspend overall are in social care, so that's 11.6 in adults and 6.6 in children's. The reasons for the overspends are due to the shortfalls in delivering the savings proposals across the board. So the committee specifically, that's the final section of the paper, just gives a very high level overview of the budget and the spend in the committee. And the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee is forecasting an underspend of £500,000 against a net budget of 45.4 million. The main areas of underspend is in the community services budgets, so that's 300 grand. So you've got small underspend in staffing, and then you've also got some in the Page Hall project, which is actually due to be carried forward into next year. It was a 2-year proposal, and there's an accounting adjustment to deal with that, which will come forward in the next couple of months. There's also an underspend in youth services due to a delay of the restructure implementation. Parks and Leisure, Parks, Leisure and Libraries are 100 grand over. There's a shortfall in the delivery of the Better Parks programme and some additional energy costs, but some of this is partially offset by vacancies in the service and some one-off contributions from energy reserves to mitigate the impact of the energy increase this year. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the position to date. So if anybody's got any questions, happy to take them. And of course, Dawn and Lisa will probably be able to answer in further detail any questions you've got. Thank you.
No questions? Okay, well,
Sorry, can I just ask you a little bit very quickly about this Page Hall project that we're sort of basically pushing into next year? Is that going to have a significant detrimental impact on our budget for next year then?
No, the project was always going to be a 2-year programme. It was a reprofile. So there was a decision taken, I think it was February last year, to reprofile the budget, and it was over 2 years. But what we actually did is we drew it all down in 1 year. So it's an accounting adjustment, really. There's no impact to the overall outcomes of the programme or the council's budget in general.
Karen.
Just quickly to ask about, you said, am I right on the libraries, there was an overspend, but it's being contracted by staffing, and it was about energy costs, that was the overspend. I'm just thinking, going forward, if we hadn't have had that staffing to match it out, are we headed for a problem later down the line because we're going to be spending more on energy?
I think I kind of whizzed through a lot of the variances and wrapped them all up together. So in Parks, Leisure and Libraries, there's the Better Parks programme, which we've got a shortfall on the delivery of the budget implementation plans, and I'm sure Lisa will be able to talk to you a bit more about the programme of delivery for that particular saving. But the vacancies across the service are kind of offsetting a bit of the impact of that this year. The energy, we've kind of built in the pressures into the budget as part of the budget process for next year. So when we kind of set out those overall pressures and the overall savings position, yes, it will be a challenge to deliver against those savings, but they are covered within that budgeted position. So I don't know whether you wanted to add to any of that on Better Parks.
So just a little bit to add, as you know, we're looking at that service review of libraries, and we've got a target to save for the committee budget for next year. So whereas those vacancies that are being carried in the service are offsetting the energy increase, as Jane said, next year the energy increase and the energy inflation has been built into the budget, and those vacancies that we're carrying at the moment to offset that this year will be resolved next year.
If there's no further questions, then the recommendation is to note that financial position. Agreed. That was unanimously agreed to note it. Thank you very much for your report. And that concludes our business today. Sorry? Oh, yeah, no, thank you all. Have a good evening.